I'm Jim Donio. Welcome to String Band Sessions Podcast. Our next series is entitled Putting It Together. We're going to be talking to experts from makeup, costume and set design, music arranging, and costuming over the next several episodes. It is the talents and the expertise of these people that help string bands put it all together. We're thrilled right now to have costume and set designer David Rigler joining us for String Band Sessions Podcast. Welcome, David. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
To share your journey with us. So let's just start out with where did you grow up? And let's talk a little bit about your academic and your creative background before we get into your mom life. Where did you grow up?
Well, again, thank you for inviting me to do this. I know we talked about full circle moment of having done this 5 years ago with stringing along with you and Ronnie King. And so I'm just so pleased and grateful that you invite me back. So thank you very much again. I grew up in South Philadelphia, like many of the people who are involved in the Mummers Parade, either as someone who's marching or an artist. I grew up in Grace Ferry by 3TO, as the kids called it, St. Gabe's Parish. Went to Newman for a little bit, and then we moved to Wilmington, Delaware, where I went to St. Mark's High School in Wilmington. And then I went to NYU Tisch School of the Arts, where I got my BFA in set and costume design in their drama department.
And so family-wise, did you have family that were in the mummers? Is that how you got started as a mum? Because you were a mummer yourself.
Sure, yes. I mean, of course, no one does this of their own free will, I don't think. So, my dad, who grew up in Roxborough, went to St. John Newman, and friends of his were in the Mummers Parade, and so he joined the Alpha Brigade, which was a fancy brigade at that time in the 70s, 80s, and so that's where he started, and that's where I started my mum career. 84, 85, 86 were my first 3 years in the parade with Alpha, and then we've gone to Saturnalian, and I was with Saturnalian through 87 through the 97 parade.
Okay. So growing up, getting involved with mums. So talk a little bit about your non-mum professional career. What's your career journey been like coming out of the Tisch School? And it's such an exciting field to be in. Tell us a little bit about, some of the jobs you've had and some of the experiences you've had in design.
Sure. I mean, I will say first and foremost, the reason I do what I do is because of the Mummers Parade. It is, I think, for most people in the inner city, the Mummers Parade is really my first exposure into the arts. It's the first time I realized what dancing and costume and music was really. And as I became older, I got be able to link that to a career. I know when Megan McFarland did some color commentary, her first year with the comics, she interviewed me for that to get some background information. And we talked a great deal about that and how much I'm an advocate for the Mummers Parade in terms of art education and what that can do to inspire people to then go on and have a career in arts, whether that be a musician or a dancer or, a set and costume designer like myself. And I've been very fortunate in that way to get that exposure and have that interest and have people in the Mummers Parade really cultivate that and really help me. And I think I mentioned this on the last time we spoke, that a lot of the things that mummers taught me, I still do in my career today, about how to put things together and how to think things through. So it's been a real blessing to have been a part of the parade for so long and to have that as a background. So when I left the area and went to NYU, I really thought that my career was going to be solely in the theater. That was my aspiration, to be Broadway set and costume designer. And I was on that trajectory for a very long time. I worked on Broadway as an assistant. I did some off-Broadway productions as well as regional. I worked in New York costume shops. I've had the opportunity to work for Ringling Brothers and Disney and SeaWorld. I worked for a theme park in Kuala Lumpur called Sky World. I've done some producing and directing, and also why in Orlando, which is where I moved to the Florida area in 2019, right before COVID. While in Orlando, though, I also did some casting and some event management. So I kind of now have a well-rounded view of entertainment in both theatrical and I call large-scale family entertainment. And right now, I actually am an executive at Universal Orlando's Epic Universe, where I am the director for costume, makeup, and wigs at their brand new park, which opened on May 22nd.
Wow. That's exciting. That's really exciting. And congratulations for that, because I know it's probably something that has, kind of opened up this wonderful, amazing world, because budgets, to have that level of budget to, invest in kind of bringing these creative dreams into reality. Anybody who's creative and then has that opportunity to build things and create things and sort of populate these amazing experiences. So, bravo, bravo.
Thank you. And I will also say a big thank you to all the mummers that I worked with this year, who essentially allowed me to take a month off in May to make sure that the park opened. So they were very generous with giving me that time this year.
Sure. So let's put your memory to work here. So
Sure.
what was the very first string band? What was the very first string band that you did design work for? Do you remember? And what year was it?
Going way back, my very first design for the parade was 2000, when it was the South Philly Vikings and they did a Star Wars theme episode 2000. So that's really where I started to move into the design realm of the parade. But yeah, my first experience with string bands happened by another serendipitous accident. I happened to be working at Dave Mazinski's shop when John Barron called John Pignotti looking for someone to design his captain's costume for their cowboy year, which was, I think, was 2011. So that was the first time I've designed anything that was in the string bands. And then, of course, I went on to design for Hegeman for a number of years. So that was the first one. That was the start into it.
Mm-hmm. And so what other bands have you done? And then we'll make sort of a transition into, what you're doing, more recently, and talk a little bit about, your winning record with some of the accomplishments you've had. So what other bands, and just talk about some of the years that you're proud of, that you're excited about, that you've designed for.
Yeah, I mean, so over the years, whether it be sets and costumes or just as a scenic specialist, which has become a real thing over the past few years as the parade has become extremely specialized and extremely production focused. Whether I'm doing one or both disciplines, I've worked with, of course, Hegeman, Aqua String Band, Polish American, Furco, Avalon, South Philly, Duffy, Greater Kensington, Uptown, Fralinger, and Woodland. I mean, that's a lot of shows over the past few years, but certainly the ones that stand out in my brain are Hegeman's Beatles show, House of Havoc, Golden Gala, Aqua when they did their Monsters Incorporated inspired theme, Lights Out, I believe it was.
Mm-hmm.
Furco, We Stand as One, which was their Native American theme. Polish American and 50 Shades of Hay. Duffy, of course, their Whiz Wit theme is very special to me. Uptown, their zombie show, I thought was a very creative and different show to be part of, and really a great committee to work with. And then Greater Kensington, I think when I started with them, we did their Greek theme.
Mm-hmm.
Was a big leap for them. And the Jeff Moyer, I think, did really well that year. And that's something real proud of as well.
Yeah, you mentioned a couple that I'm going to circle back to. So, Hegeman's Just Imagine
Mm,
was, I think, a particularly like memorable for people who maybe remember it, or maybe after watching this episode, now they'll go and they'll watch it on the String Band database or on YouTube. Um, the transition from black and white
mhm.
to color. So, did they come to you with that idea of making that Was it your idea, or did they come to you already with the idea of the thought that they were going to make an opening transition from black and white to color? Because it was uh, so magical.
Yeah, I know it's a lot of bands do it now, and I know that was particularly successful that year. I mean, big sweeping color changes it wasn't a new thing, but maybe something that had been dormant for a while. I will say that idea most likely came out of collaboration. That year, Todd Marcacci came on to consult with Hegeman and John Barron, and I think a lot of these shows um, that ended up being really well conceived and really well executed are a result of great collaboration, which is what I kind of found in my career in general. It's when you have when all ships are going in the same direction is typically when you've got a solid performance and a really well executed idea. Um, and I think that was an initial idea that we're talking about, but how to incorporate it. And Hegeman's Just Imagine theme is similar to Duffy's Whiz Wit in the sense that a show like that can very easily become too campy for the parade,
Mhm.
and you could lose your audience. You could lose the judges very quickly when you do that if it's not grounded in something.
Mhm.
And so that opening, that not just black and white, but the sense that it was realism versus fantasy. This idea of reality and photorealistic, not just black and white. Because even the two main dancers in the beginning, they didn't have sequins on them, and
Mhm.
I design and shop those, and I had a friend of mine build the dress, and so with the process of executing it was also outside the realm of mummery. And
Yeah.
we also, I don't know if it had been done before, but certainly all that black and white stuff I created on Photoshop and was digitally printed. I know we see a lot of digital artwork now, but I think that was a risk at the time
Mhm.
to do that done.
Sure.
Which then, of course, then led to the next year we had our fabric digitally printed. So it was a gamble that I think paid off both in the black and white and then the texture contrasts, and then of course then rooting the next scene into more fantasy like Sergeant Pepper and Yellow Submarine, and using the artwork inspired by that to ground that particular transition.
Yeah. Um, so, as the years then have unfolded, what's the balance now between costume design and set design? Are you doing like half your groups are one or the other? Are most of the groups both?
Yeah, this
And how does
yeah.
that, yeah, you talked about collaboration. So in the examples where you're doing one or the other, then obviously you're collaborating with somebody else, with some other entity
Mhm.
that is filling in, that piece of the puzzle. Um, and as I said at the beginning of this sort of series is about putting it together. So how does that work? And what would you say right now in terms of doing one or the other or both for a fairly long list of bands that you mentioned before?
No, this year is not as long as that full list. Right now, I'm only doing sets and costumes for Aqua and Woodland, and then just scenery for Uptown South Philly and Fralinger. So this year, I'm actually doing more scenery, just scenery than costumes.
Okay.
Um, and when I'm doing just Cedar, talking about the collaboration, typically how we start is I like all minds come to the table at once, um, and the first few months is really a free for all of ideas, and especially when you have a lot of people in the committee that want their idea to be used. And I think Uptown is a really great example of this process in particular, because each band is different. Each band has a different personality, different way of working. I would say South Philly and Fralinger are a little different in terms of how they work as opposed to Uptown. So this particular process really relates more so to Uptown, and then, Aqua and Woodland when I do both disciplines. But initially we'll start with a storyboard. So we'll take what the committee says, and in the case of Uptown, Russ Fama did their clothing. So in his initial ideas, and then I put that all on a storyboard. And the initial storyboard really does try to get every single idea into it. And then we realize, of course, that's too much, right? That doesn't work. It doesn't work from a storytelling point of view. It doesn't work from a Marshall's or construction point of view. And it just doesn't really have a good narrative, right? It doesn't. And so then we go back and we tweak and we tweak and we tweak. And what I like to do, and what works for Uptown, is that we have the complete storyboard done. We have the story laid out, we have the narrative laid out, and that is done so then everybody else can do their work, right? Russ can go off and do his design work. The band can then articulate, what costume is in what area, whether it be a pit band or a banjo feature or a dancer costume. And then the composer can start writing based on that storyboard, and the choreographer and the drill designer can still start working on that, so everybody can get going, right? And then typically I stand down until Russ finishes the designs, so then I get a sense of stylistically what they're thinking and sort of color palette, and then I can twist on it.
Yeah, and it's the extent of the collaboration is so much more involved than it used to be, because you have, in the instances that you're mentioning, someone who's designing the costumes, then yourself, doing the sets and maybe some prop elements as well. Someone perhaps is doing makeup, masks, music arranging, choreography, the actual drill, itself, and then moving all these pieces. So I think this series is well titled at Putting It Together, because it's quite a complex job today to put all these elements
Of course.
to balance everything. You mentioned Uptown, and we've already interviewed them, so we know they're doing a Hollywood script to screen concept for this year, and that they're approaching it from a very different perspective than, say, previous Hollywood or movie themes. So my question is not specifically about them, but when the bands come to you with the initial concept, and then something perhaps costume-wise is designed by you or by someone else, are the sets ever earlier on, or is it really a sort of a methodical, we need to see this and this and this and this, or does your brain start going when they come to you and say, we're doing Hollywood, but we're doing like script to screen? Like, do the ideas then start to populate in your head of like, how would we execute something like that?
Oh, of course. Yeah. The beginning is chaos. It's mental chaos. It's just, and it's a lot of conversation and a lot of looking at images and putting pencil to paper, or in this case, stylus to tablet, so to speak, as we enter the digital age. And, like I said, like the committee will have an idea, and as will I, and I tend to draw them both out to kind of, and the storyboards initially that I do are very remedial, right? Almost just squares sometimes, or clip art, just that they can kind of see the movement. So what it looks like in a in your Dropbox folder or your PDF vision board, right, is very different than the way it looks on the street. And so to see it, I think for me, seeing it in that perspective view and scene by scene really is informative about what works and what doesn't. And then we start to tweak it. I certainly have my perception on what a Hollywood show means to me, and they have their perception, and then we kind of refine how both ideas work, and we might go with their aesthetic idea, but my technical idea, and sometimes vice versa. I will say that what's great about working with Uptown is that we have the same aesthetic, which is to have humor. I think sometimes when the productions get so large that humor can be lost a little bit, and I think there are several bands who are fantastic at the humor part. And I think Uptown is also one of them. And when it comes to that, and again, the characterization of their performers and their captain.
Right. Yeah, we've talked about in the Concept to Creation series, we talked about that in the string bands of 2026, you actually have in most, if not all, of the instances an actual through line, a story. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end, as compared to, string band themes of yore, where it was, pretty suit, some great music, and a lavish, beautiful costume, but there wasn't necessarily, a method or a message that's trying to be conveyed. And humor is incorporated a lot because there's so many elements, the features to the skits, even that each transition may have its own place in this through line. So even a transition is conveying something. So tell me a little bit about the sort of the back and forth as their stories are unfolding, and this 4.5 minutes is going piece by piece. How much back and forth is there for you to make adjustments?
I think in the very beginning, the first few months of the process, there's quite a bit of back and forth. In particular, with let's say Woodland and Aqua and Uptown, who I start with right at the beginning, because we're all figuring it out together. But after the first, I think, month or 6 weeks, we've got a pretty good framework. It doesn't change much after that because you start writing music and you start doing drill. Everything becomes a little bit more difficult to change because there are other dominoes, so to speak, that have to be considered, which is why we take really good care at the beginning to make sure that those details are thought about. So when we come back to it in a few months and look at it, we do make changes, but they're more of a refinement and finding the little moments to put into the show. What did we miss? What's a little moment here? I do talk a little bit about the bands about, I know old school mummery is thinking about gimmicks. So having 100 gimmicks and how do we string them together into a show, where when I talk about how I would put together any show, like I would put together any production, I think outward and then move inwards. Like what's the emotion? What's the arc? What's the feeling? What's the goal? What's the purpose? And then refine. And so for new clients, it's a very difficult concept to grasp. But once we have a working vocabulary, it becomes very successful. And I think because we do it that way, when we get a few months after the initial part, when we get into the April, May section of finishing up the scenic designs, there's really just about refinement of those key moments.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely an emphasis these days on intention. What's this intended to do? Is it intended to convey something? Is it an opportunity for something to change? Like we're changing a scene or we're moving from one element to another element. The bands that you're doing this year, there's definitely a theatrical through line, I think. South Philadelphia with their sort of Aladdin spinoff, as they're referring to it. You mentioned Aqua. Aqua sort of has the Irish elements to theirs, but it's fantastical. So when I interviewed them, I said, there are certainly, films that have conveyed that. And, you talked about, Fralinger, their undersea concept, they've said to me in their interview, is also going to be very theatrically, like movie score inspired. So probably for the ones that you're doing this year, there does seem to be a little bit of a through line that seems like it's perfectly in your wheelhouse. It seems like there is a very theatrically inspired set of themes for this year.
It's been fascinating to see the band's transition over the past decade plus that I've been involved. I started out being the theater kid, even though I grew up in the Mummers Parade. I got dubbed the theater kid, and I come in, start talking about narrative, and it was really, there was some pushback for sure at the beginning, and then I think with a band like Hegeman and Aqua, who were my initial clients, started to embrace that, and there was some success that started to catch on a little bit. And so I don't think that the Mummers are afraid of it in the way they were a decade ago, the term narrative or theater. And even so, when I start a process with someone, my first question is, what's the opening and how does it make you feel? And that's a jarring question for people who don't know how I work, right? It's like, what do you mean? It's just a bunch of sequence of feathers. But that tells me that you thought about the music, right? And if you thought about, because you're a band, you first and foremost a band, you bring me into it to design the costumes, but you're a band. So what does the music sound like? How does it make you feel? And then that informs me about then what the aesthetic is and what the story is, and then what your goals are. And that helps me then to come up with the ideas. And again, new clients have a hard time kind of understanding that. But in the second year, the light bulb does go off, and I think it starts to get progressively easier. And I'm really grateful that I get to bring that aspect to the Mummers Parade.
Yeah, as are we, as fans of your work, who have watched, as I think you've definitely helped advance this whole area of the costume and set design. And we just want to thank you so much for the gift of your time, for
Too kind.
coming and joining us and telling a little bit about your story, and also how you are living the dream for being a creative person and having this really special outlet for your talents. And I can say, just from my own perspective, having done a little bit of design in my own past, that it's very special to contribute to this hobby that people call it, but this oldest folk parade, in the country, and see that work creatively come alive. So thank you so much, David. We appreciate you joining us for the String Band Sessions podcast.
Well, thank you. If I can leave some advice for any band, if you see a kid in your band that shows a little extra interest, pay attention, cultivate him or her, and make sure that they have a safe environment to create in, because I'm a living testament that could lead to really great things beyond the parade.
Great. Thank you so much. That's David Rigler, who is a costume and set designer for the string bands. Thanks for watching the String Band Sessions podcast. You can find all of our previous episodes on the String Band Association's Facebook page, our YouTube channel, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts.